The sky over Alaska cracked open at 4:47 a.m., and nobody was ready for what fell out of it. Elena Voss was already awake when the first ship broke atmosphere. She hadn't slept properly in 11 years, not really, and that night she'd been sitting on her porch with a cold cup of coffee staring at the tree line the way she did most nights, when the stars above the ridge began to move wrong. Not shooting stars, not satellites. Points of light sliding sideways, too many of them, too fast, arranging themselves into a shape that made her stomach drop before her mind caught up. She stood so fast the coffee mug shattered on the porch boards. Across the world, screens lit up with the same impossible footage. Vast, dark hulls unfolding out of nothing above dozens of cities, silent as held breath. No demands, no broadcasts, no warning shots. For 6 long minutes, humanity simply watched, frozen, waiting for the invasion to begin. It began in Alaska. Captain Reyes Mbeki was 300 miles south, strapped into the command chair of the carrier Meridian, when her tactical officer's voice cracked over the comm. "Ma'am, we have contact. No, multiple contacts. They're not engaging the fleet. Repeat, they are not engaging." "Then what are they doing?" Reyes snapped, pulling up the display herself. The answer scrolled across her screen in cold telemetry. 17 Kalish warships bypassing every major population center, every military installation, every obvious target, all of them converging on a single set of coordinates in the Alaskan interior. A mountain. Nothing else. No city. No base that existed on any public record. Reyes had spent 20 years training for a war that made sense. This one didn't. "Command, this is Meridian Actual. They're ignoring us. They're going around us like we're not even here." The response took too long to come. When it did, it was worse than silence. "Meridian, hold position. That location is need to know. Do not engage." "Sir, with respect, an alien armada is diving on a facility with no name and you're telling me to hold position?" Nobody answered her. Elena didn't wait for permission from anyone. She'd spent 11 years pretending she didn't know exactly what was buried under that mountain, and the moment those ships turned toward it instead of toward her cabin, instead of toward Anchorage, instead of toward anywhere that made sense, she knew with a certainty that turned her blood to ice. They weren't invading Earth. They were coming for something specific, something she'd helped bury. She ran. Her truck fishtailed down the gravel drive, headlights carving a tunnel through the dark pines, the sky behind her strobing white and orange as dropships screamed overhead, their engines shaking snow loose from branches 100 feet up. In her rearview mirror, she watched one peel off from the formation and bank hard, correcting course. Toward her. "They know where I live," she thought, and the thought terrified her more than the ships did. "They know exactly where I live." She abandoned the truck a half-mile from the ridge when the road buckled under something's weight and the engine died. She ran the rest on foot, lungs burning, snow soaking through her boots, following a path she hadn't walked in over a decade but her body still remembered. Past the fake ranger station, past the fence line marked with signs that lied about a decommissioned mining survey, to a slab of granite that looked like nothing at all. Behind her, through the trees, she heard voices. Not human ones, a language of clicks and long vowels that dragged at something old in the back of her skull. Some fossil of memory she'd spent 11 years trying to forget she had. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone, and for one terrible second nothing happened. And she thought, "It's gone. They decommissioned it. I'm going to die out here for nothing." And then the rock face split with a hiss of pressurized air, a seam of light appearing where none should exist, a door that hadn't officially existed since the day she was discharged and told, in no uncertain terms, to never speak of Project Starfall again. It knew her hand. After 11 years, it still knew her. She threw herself through the gap as it began grinding open wider, and behind her the trees exploded outward in a spray of splintered pine as 3 armored figures broke into the clearing. Tall, segmented, moving with a horrible fluid precision that no human body could match. Their weapons were already raised. One of them opened a mouth full of too many teeth and screamed a word in broken, badly accented Terran. Her name. Elena didn't stop to wonder how an alien invasion force had learned to say Elena Voss before it learned to say hello. She scrambled through the widening gap in the rock, boots skidding on the smooth metal floor beyond, and slammed her palm against an interior panel with the last coherent thought she had left. Close, close, close. The door obeyed. Stone and steel ground shut with a boom that she felt in her teeth, sealing away the screaming and the gunfire and the alien voice that had known her name, sealing her into a darkness so total it felt like being buried alive. Something hit the door from the other side. Not a weapon, a body, a fist, something with enough strength to make the entire wall shudder. Claws, or fingers, or something in between, scraped against metal on the far side of 6 feet of reinforced rock, hunting for a seam that wasn't there anymore. Elena backed away from the door on legs that didn't feel like her own, breath tearing out of her in ragged gasps, until her spine hit the cold curve of the far wall and she had nowhere left to go. The emergency lights hadn't come on. The facility should have been dead, decommissioned, stripped, forgotten, a corpse of a project buried under a mountain along with everything she used to be. It should have been silent. It wasn't. Somewhere ahead of her, deep in the dark throat of the tunnel that led down into the earth, a string of lights flickered to life one after another, section by section, like something enormous slowly opening its eyes after a very long sleep. The hum of old machinery rose from far below, a sound she felt in the soles of her feet before she heard it. And then, carried up out of the dark on air that smelled of ozone and 11 years of dust, came a voice. It wasn't the alien voice from outside, it wasn't human either. Not quite. It was low and warm, and impossibly, achingly familiar, threaded through with something that might have been relief and might have been grief, and it said 4 words that dropped Elena to her knees on the cold metal floor. "You're late," it said. "I've been waiting." The voice in the dark had been silent for 11 years, and Elena had spent every one of them trying to convince herself she'd imagined it the first time. She didn't answer it now. She couldn't. Her legs wouldn't hold her upright, and she stayed on her knees on the cold floor, staring down the black throat of the tunnel where the lights kept flickering on, section by section, drawing a glowing path deeper into the mountain like something inviting her in. Outside, muffled through 6 feet of rock, the alien pounding on the door had stopped. That should have made her feel safer. It didn't. "Whoever's down there," she said, her voice cracking on the first word, "this facility was decommissioned. There's nothing left to protect. Whatever you are, whatever's left of the old systems, I need you to open the tunnels behind me and let me leave." Nothing answered. The lights kept crawling deeper, patient, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world and were simply waiting for her to catch up. That was when the second voice came, a human one, ragged with disuse, screaming from somewhere ahead of her in the dark. "Don't move!" Elena froze. A flashlight beam swung across her face, blinding her, and she heard the unmistakable metallic clack of a rifle being leveled at her chest. "Hands where I can see them." "Now." She raised her hands slowly, squinting past the light at the shape holding it. A man, gaunt under a filthy uniform that had once been military issue, a beard grown wild, eyes sunken with the particular hollowness of someone who hadn't seen another human face in a very long time. His hands were shaking, but the rifle didn't waver. I used to work here," Elena said. 11 years ago. Project Starfall. My clearance. Your clearance doesn't exist anymore. Nothing here exists anymore. That's the whole point." His finger tightened on the trigger, and for one terrible second she thought that was going to be how it ended. Not torn apart by aliens outside, but shot by a forgotten soldier who never got the order to stand down. Then the flashlight beam caught her face fully, and something in his expression cracked open. "Voss?" he said. "Dr. Voss? Yes, it's me." The rifle dropped an inch, then another. "You're supposed to be dead. They told us. After the incident, they told the whole detail you were dead." "Who told you that?" "Command, before they stopped sending anyone at all." He lowered the weapon fully, and up close she could see just how long he'd been down here. The layers of dust on his uniform, The makeshift bedding piled in a side corridor, the empty ration containers stacked with the obsessive neatness of a man clinging to routine as the only thing keeping him sane. Corporal Daniosi. I was posted here the year before the shutdown. Everyone else evacuated when the funding got pulled. I got left behind. Paperwork error, they said. Then the years just kept happening. You've been alone down here for 11 years? Not alone. Something flickered across his face. Not quite fear, not quite reverence. It's still here. Whatever's down in the lower levels. I stayed to make sure nobody got to it. Elena's chest tightened. Danny, the ship's outside. They're not human. They're already breaching the tree line. If they get through that door. They won't get through that door, he said, with the flat certainty of a man who'd checked that fact 1,000 times out of boredom and terror in equal measure. But if they bring something bigger, eventually they will. Which means whatever brought them here, we need to understand it before they do. He turned and started walking into the dark, flashlight beam swinging, and after a heartbeat, Elena followed. Because she didn't have anywhere else to go, and because some buried 11-year-old instinct in her chest was already screaming that she knew exactly what had brought them here. The corridor opened into what had once been the primary research wing. Long dead monitor banks lining the walls, control panels dark under a decade of dust. Warning signs bolted beside every door in a script that made Elena's skin crawl. Not English, not any human language. Angular, looping characters that seemed to shift subtly when she looked at them too long, like her brain refused to render them properly. You can read that? Danny asked, watching her stare. I used to be able to, she said quietly. I was the linguist on this project. First contact team. We found something out past the Kuiper Belt. A derelict drifting, already dying. Kalish design, though we didn't have that name for them yet. She trailed her fingers along one of the panels, and fragments came back to her in flashes, sharp and unwelcome. Cold cargo bays, a presence, vast and patient, waiting in the dark. A colleague's face, lit by emergency lighting, telling her we have to make a choice, right now, or neither of us walks away from this. What happened? Danny asked. After you found it. Why did it all get buried? I don't remember. Elena admitted and hated how true it was. There's a gap. 11 years, and there's a gap right where the answer should be. They kept walking, deeper, following the trail of lights that had never once stopped guiding them forward. The air grew colder, tinged with a chemical sharpness that Elena's body recognized before her mind did. Cryogenic coolant, old but still cycling, still working, still keeping something alive down here in the dark long after everyone who was supposed to maintain it had left or died, or been ordered to forget. They reached a final blast door, thicker than any they'd passed, its surface etched with a warning in 3 languages, one of them human. Starfall subject, Level 5 containment. Do not revive without authorization from Director Voss. Elena stared at her own name stenciled into a door she didn't remember ever standing in front of. You're the director, Danny said slowly. You're the only authorization that door has ever needed. 11 years, and I never had clearance to open it. I just guarded it, waited. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd walked into his flashlight beam, there was something like hope in his ruined face. Maybe that's what we've both been waiting for. The door hissed and split down the middle at the sound of her voice giving the old command codes, muscle memory surfacing from somewhere she didn't know she'd buried it. Frigid air rolled out to meet them, thick with fog, and beyond it a single cryo chamber sat at the center of the room, its glass rimed thick with frost, cables snaking from its base into machinery that had never once in 11 years stopped humming. Elena crossed the room on legs gone numb, and pressed her bare palm flat against the frozen glass. The frost melted instantly beneath her touch, spreading outward in a bloom of clear glass, revealing what lay inside. Not a weapon, not a data core, not an artifact, not the alien relic she had spent 11 years bracing herself to find. A man, human, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths that shouldn't have been possible after over a decade in cryostasis. And as her hand touched the glass above his heart, his eyes snapped open, clear, aware, and fixed directly on her face. as if he had been waiting behind those closed lids for this exact moment for 11 long years. His first word wasn't English. It came out of him in a rush of clicks and long, dragging vowels, the same alien cadence Elena had heard screamed outside the mountain an hour before, and for one horrifying second she thought she'd made a catastrophic mistake, that she'd woken something wearing a human face. Then his eyes focused on her, really focused, and his mouth twisted like he was fighting his own throat for control of it. And what came out next was English, cracked and slow like a language he was relearning in real time. Elena. His voice broke on her name. You came back. She knew that voice. 11 years buried under grief and denial, and she still knew it instantly, in her bones, before her mind could even supply the name. Corvin, she whispered. Danny's rifle came back up. You know this thing? He's not a thing. Elena's hands were shaking as she worked the release seals on the cryo chamber, ignoring the tearing pain of frost-burned fingers. He's a person. He was my research partner. Corvin Ash. He died 11 years ago. I watched the incident report. I signed the incident report. Then what's lying in that chamber? Corvin answered before she could. I didn't die, he rasped, struggling to sit up as the last restraints released, his body shaking with the effort of moving muscles that hadn't moved in over a decade. I just stopped being only myself. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, dragging loose a memory she'd spent 11 years walling off. A cargo bay lit by dying red emergency lights, a derelict ship groaning around them, and Corvin's voice, calm in a way that terrified her more than panic would have, saying, There's no time, Elena. It's dying, and if it dies with its cargo intact, the Dominion will never stop looking for it. I have to be the one who carries it out. She hadn't understood what he meant. She still hadn't watched him do it. She'd been thrown clear in the collapse that followed. Had woken up in a medical bay being told her partner didn't survive. Had spent 11 years believing that. Carries what out? She said now, her voice barely holding steady. Corvin, what did you do? He looked at his own hands like he didn't fully recognize them. It's not all here. My memory. There's pieces missing and pieces that aren't mine at all. He looked up at her, and something flickered behind his eyes that wasn't quite human. There and gone in an instant, like a second consciousness surfacing for just a breath before submerging again. I remember the ship. I remember it dying around us. I remember something inside it, something old and afraid, and it needed a place to survive that wasn't the wreck. I remember choosing. Above them, muffled through hundreds of feet of rock, a distant boom rolled through the facility, deep enough to rattle dust from the ceiling. Danny's head snapped up. They're not knocking anymore, he said grimly. Elena hauled Corvin upright, draping his arm over her shoulder, feeling how light he was, how his body seemed to be relearning gravity itself with every unsteady step. We need to move. Whatever's coming down after us, we can't be standing in a dead-end chamber when it arrives. They made it 3 corridors before Corvin's steps faltered entirely. He stopped dead in the middle of the hallway, one hand flying to his skull, a low groan tearing out of him that curdled into something else halfway through. A different pitch, a different rhythm, syllables that didn't belong to any human throat sliding out from between his teeth. Corvin? Elena grabbed his shoulders. Corvin, stay with me. His head snapped up, and for a moment his eyes weren't looking at her at all. They were fixed on something past her, something only he could see. Tracking movement in empty air, the facility's ancient AI, still limping along on backup power, crackled to life through a wall-mounted speaker they hadn't noticed was still functional, its voice flat and mechanical as it did something Elena hadn't asked it to do. Translating detected transmission, it announced. Source, unknown. Frequency consistent with Kalish military channel. Corvin's mouth kept moving, alien words spilling out of him in a voice that had gone strangely toneless, and the AI dutifully rendered them into English half a beat behind. Word by chilling word. Command vessel to all units. The vessel is contained. Do not let it reach the surface intact. Authorization for total facility collapse is granted if extraction fails. Silence rang in the corridor after the last word. Danny lowered his rifle an inch, staring at Corvin with something between horror and pity. Elena felt the floor tilt under her, not from any tremor in the rock, but from the sentence rearranging itself in her mind, again and again, until its true shape became unavoidable. The vessel. Not a person to be captured. Not a fugitive to be recovered. A vessel, a container. Something being carried, not someone being hunted. "Corvin," she said slowly, forcing her voice to stay level even as her pulse hammered in her throat. "What are you carrying?" His eyes cleared, refocused on her face, and for one unguarded second she saw something in them that looked exactly like the man she remembered, scared and sorry and desperate for her to understand before it was too late to matter. "I don't know all of it," he admitted, breathless. "But I know it's old. Older than the Dominion's whole empire. I know it's been sleeping inside me for 11 years and it's starting to wake up, and I know—" His voice cracked. "I know they're not scared of losing a weapon, Elena. They're scared of what happens if it finishes waking up while it's still inside me." Another boom rolled through the mountain, closer this time, close enough that dust sifted from a crack spidering across the ceiling above them. Danny grabbed Elena's arm, hauling both of them toward a side passage, shouting something about a maintenance shaft that might buy them time. But Elena barely heard him. She was still looking at Corvin, at the man she'd mourned for 11 years standing in front of her with something ancient and alien coiled inside his skull, watching the fear in his human eyes war against a second presence rising up beneath it, patient, vast, and finally, after 11 long years, beginning to open its eyes. The maintenance shaft dropped them into a sub-level that shouldn't have existed on any blueprint Elena had ever had clearance to see. And the first thing she found there was her own name, buried in files she never remembered writing. Danny worked the emergency terminal with the ease of a man who'd had 11 years and nothing but time to learn every dead system in the facility. And the moment the ancient screen flickered to life, Elena's service record scrolled up in front of her, riddled with black redaction bars. Except for one line left untouched, almost mockingly clear. "Director Voss, memory suppression authorized. Subject's own request." "That's not possible," she whispered. "I never authorized anything to be done to my own memory." "You're looking right at it," Danny said grimly, scrolling further. There was more. Mission logs, partially intact, timestamps crawling toward the date she'd been told for 11 years. Was the day Corvin Ash died. She made herself read it, every fragmented, redacted line, piecing together a truth her own mind had apparently begged to forget. The derelict they'd found past the Kuiper Belt hadn't been a warship. It had been a seed vessel, an archive and a living thing at once, grown rather than built, carrying within it the accumulated memory, knowledge, and collective consciousness of an entire Kalish clan. Not a weapon aimed outward, a mind, preserved, waiting for a host willing to carry it. The log entries called that clan heretics. Erased from Dominion history generations ago for a crime the files didn't specify, only that the punishment had been total, and that whatever the seed vessel carried, the Dominion had spent every year since hunting for surviving fragments of it across 1,000 systems, terrified of what would happen if even one ever woke fully again. Corvin, listening over her shoulder, made a small, broken sound. "I remember now," he said. "Not all of it, but I remember choosing to let it bond with me instead of letting it die in that wreck. I remember thinking, someone has to carry this so it isn't lost forever." His hand trembled against the edge of the console. "I didn't know what it would cost." "It cost you 11 years in a box," Elena said, her voice raw. "It cost you your memory. It's costing you your own mind. Right now, in real time. It's not trying to hurt me." He said it like he wasn't fully sure he believed it. "I think it's trying not to. I think that's why it's been fighting to stay asleep this whole time. Because every time it starts to surface, it takes more of me with it." Elena reached for the log's final entry, and the screen resisted for a moment before yielding, as if some old, buried protocol recognized her authority even now. What she found there stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't a mission report. It was a message, recorded in her own voice, dated the day after the incident. A version of herself she had no memory of ever being. If you're hearing this, then the suppression worked, and I'm sorry. I couldn't carry the knowledge of what we did and keep functioning. Corvin made his choice to save something worth saving. I made mine to forget I let him. Whatever happens next, whoever finds this, protect him. Not because of what he's carrying, because of who he still is underneath it. Elena's knees nearly buckled. Danny caught her elbow, steadying her, his own face pale in the terminal's dim glow. You buried this on purpose, he said quietly. You buried yourself on purpose. To survive it. I don't remember doing it, Elena said, staring at her own recorded voice like it belonged to a stranger. But I believe it. God help me, I believe every word. She turned to Corvin and found him watching her with an expression that broke something loose in her chest. Grief and gratitude and terror tangled together. A man clinging to the last threads of himself. He didn't get to hold on to them for long. His back arched, a sound tearing out of him that was half scream and half something older and stranger. And when his head snapped back up, his eyes had changed. Not glowing, not inhuman in any way she could point to and name, but wrong. Focused with a patience and a coldness that had never belonged to the man she remembered. Corvin, Elena's voice shook. When he spoke, it was in his own voice, layered underneath with something else entirely. Two consciousnesses fighting for the same throat. It's stronger down here, he forced out. Closer to the surface, and it can feel them up there, feel its own people, and it wants to finish waking up, Elena. And if it does, I don't think there's going to be room left for both of us. Somewhere above them, a distant series of explosions rattled through the rock, and Danny's radio, a relic he'd kept charged and functional through 11 years of solitary discipline, crackled with a voice Elena hadn't heard in over a decade of silence. Reyes Mbeki, hoarse and furious, broadcasting on every open channel she had left. Anyone in that mountain, this is Captain Mbeki, Earth Defense Fleet. We are losing the sky, I say again. We are losing the sky. Whatever you're protecting down there, you need to move, because we cannot hold this position much longer. The transmission dissolved into static and gunfire. Corvin's hand shot out and seized Elena's wrist. Too fast, too strong, alien strength wearing a human grip. And when he looked at her, both halves of him were visible at once in his eyes, warring, and it was his own voice that broke through on top, raw with desperation and love, and 11 years of grief compressed into a single sentence. Don't let it finish waking up, he begged her. Elena, please, if it takes all of me, kill me before it does. Elena did not raise a weapon. She raised her hands to Corvin's face instead, forcing his eyes to hold hers, and said the one thing 11 years of grief and guilt had never let her say out loud. No. Elena. I said no. Her voice cracked but didn't waver. I let you go once because I thought you were already dead. I'm not doing it again while you're standing right in front of me asking me to. Danny hovered near the doorway, rifle half raised, torn between the enemy he understood and the one he didn't. Doc, if that thing takes him over completely, we're not looking at losing one man. We're looking at whatever's inside him getting loose in a facility, about to be sitting on top of an invasion force. I know. Elena didn't look away from Corvin's face, from the two warring presences fighting behind his eyes. That's exactly why I'm not going to kill him. Killing him doesn't stop it. It just makes sure nobody's left who can reach it. She'd spent her career being told languages weren't just words. They were minds, structures of thought, entire ways of understanding the universe folded into grammar and syntax. She'd used that training once, 11 years ago, to speak to something ancient and alone drifting in the dark past the Kuiper Belt. She hadn't done it since. She'd told herself she never would again. She did it now. She pressed her palms against Corvin's temples, closed her eyes, and reached, not for him, but past him, toward the vast, cold, patient presence coiled beneath his thoughts, using the fragments of a language she'd buried along with her own memory of ever learning it. I know what you are, she thought. forming the shapes of it as carefully as she could, feeling them land somewhere she had no name for. I know what they did to your people. I know why you're afraid. For a long moment, nothing answered. Then something vast turned its attention toward her, and it was like standing at the edge of an ocean at night. She felt its size before she felt anything else. Felt 11 years of loneliness compressed into a presence that had spent over a decade with no one to speak to except one exhausted, grieving human mind. It expects to be feared, she realized with sudden, aching clarity. It's never once been anything else. You don't have to take everything from him to survive. She pushed back, holding the thought steady even as her own head began to throb with the effort. He chose to save you. He's still choosing right now to hold on. Let him. Above ground, the sky over the mountain had become an unbroken sheet of fire. Reyes and Becky watched her tactical display flare red across the board, ship after ship dropping off the grid, and made the only calculation left that mattered. The Kalish command vessel's shields were drawing power from every other ship in range to compensate for the damage her fleet had already inflicted, which meant, for one narrow window, they were weaker than they'd ever be again. Helm, redline the engines, she said. Full burn, direct heading, ram profile. Her XO's voice cracked over the comm. Captain, that's not a strike run. That's a suicide run. That's an order. She gripped the arms of her chair as the Meridian screamed forward, alarms wailing through every deck. Whatever's under that mountain, it's worth more than my ship. Tell the crew, anyone who can eject now. I'm not asking anyone else to ride this in with me. The Meridian struck the Kalish command vessel's shield generator array at a velocity that turned 11,000 tons of human engineering into a hammer blow the Dominion had no framework to predict. Kalish tactical doctrine accounted for retreat, for surrender, for calculated loss. It did not account for a captain choosing to trade her own life without hesitation to buy strangers underground a few more minutes. The shockwave rattled through the mountain a heartbeat later, deep enough that dust rained from the ceiling of the sublevel, where Elna still knelt with her hands pressed to Corvin's temples, deep enough that Danny staggered against the wall, deep enough that for one terrible second Elena's concentration broke. It was almost enough to lose him entirely. Corvin's whole body convulsed, alien light flooding briefly behind his eyes, and Danny's radio caught one last garbled transmission from Reyes before the channel dissolved into static forever. Hold the line. Whatever's down there. Make it worth it. And Elena felt something in her chest tear loose at the sound of a voice sacrificing everything for people she'd never even met. She held on. She died for this. Elena pushed into the vast, listening presence beneath Corvin's mind, no longer bothering to be gentle. A woman I've never spoken to just gave her life for a man she'll never know existed. Because she believed whatever's down here was worth saving. Not conquering, not weaponizing. Saving. Is that something your people ever gave each other? Is that something the Dominion ever gave you before they decided you were better off erased? Silence, vast and total. Then, for the first time, something that wasn't resistance. Something that felt, impossibly, like grief. Outside the sublevel, the last blast door between them and the tunnel above shuddered under an impact that wasn't distant anymore. Danny threw himself against the emergency controls, sealing what was left of the corridor behind them, buying seconds with his body between the enemy and the two people he'd spent 11 years learning to protect without ever knowing their names. Go, he shouted, blood already running from a gash along his hairline where falling debris had caught him. I'll hold them as long as I can, get him somewhere they can't reach. Danny, there's nowhere left to run to. Then make this count. His voice cracked, not with fear, but with something fiercer. 11 years, Doc. I didn't wait 11 years down here just to watch you both die 2 rooms away from finishing it. The ceiling groaned above them, a deep structural sound that had nothing left to do with weapons fire and everything to do with a mountain finally beginning to give way. Elena felt the floor shift under her knees, felt Corvin's body go rigid in her hands as the presence beneath his thoughts surged forward one final time, no longer fighting her, no longer resisting, reaching instead for something she couldn't name. Some final threshold neither of them could stop now that it had been crossed. His eyes flooded completely with alien light. Corvin! Elena screamed his name into the collapsing dark and got no answer. He dropped to the floor at her feet, utterly still, as the ceiling above them finally began to come down. Corvin's heart had stopped for 11 seconds before it started again. Elena counted every one of them with her hands pressed to his chest, screaming his name into a room filling with dust and falling rock, refusing to accept the silence where his pulse should have been. On the 12th second, he gasped like a man surfacing from deep water, and his eyes opened. They were his own, only his own. No flicker of alien light beneath them, no second presence surfacing to fight for control of his throat. He stared up at Elena, disoriented, and when he spoke, his voice came out steady in a way it hadn't been since the moment he'd woken from the cryo chamber. "It's still here," he said slowly, feeling the words as he said them, testing them like unfamiliar ground. "I can feel it, but it's not fighting me anymore." He looked at his own hands, flexing them, and something like wonder broke through the exhaustion on his face. "We're not separate, not two minds sharing one body. We're just one thing now. Both of us." Elena helped him sit up, hardly daring to believe it, and the ceiling groaned again above them. A reminder that survival wasn't guaranteed just because the fight inside Corvin's skull had ended. Danny burst back through the sealed corridor doorway. Blood streaked down the side of his face, half his uniform torn but alive, dragging a fallen support beam out of their path with strength that had to be running on nothing but adrenaline and 11 years of stubbornness. "Whatever you two are doing in here, you'd better be finishing it fast. This whole level's coming down." "It's finished," Corvin said, climbing to his feet with Elena's help, steadier now with every passing second. Or starting. I'm not sure which anymore. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, something had shifted behind them. Not alien, not frightening, but vast in a way that made Elena's breath catch. "I can hear them. The fleet above us. Their command channel. All of it. Laid bare in my head like it's always belonged there." "What are you hearing?" Elena asked. "The truth they've been burying for longer than either of our species has had spaceflight." His jaw tightened. The clan that made this archive wasn't erased for rebellion. That's the story the Dominion tells its own soldiers. They were erased because they believed species like yours, species without a seat at any empire's table, deserved to be spoken with, not conquered, not catalogued, not hunted for what you might be hiding. He looked at Elena, at Danny, at the collapsing corridor around them, and something fierce and certain settled into his expression. The Dominion didn't invade Earth to conquer it. They invaded because they were terrified this truth would finally reach someone who'd believe it. "Then let them hear it," Elena said. "All of them. Every soldier up there." Corvin didn't hesitate. He reached, not inward this time, but outward, through the same vast network of listening minds that had spent the last hour hunting him through a collapsing mountain. And he gave them everything. Not a weapon, not a threat. The truth, broadcast raw and unfiltered into every Kalish mind still holding formation above the ruins of the facility. The invasion didn't end in fire. It ended in silence and then in chaos. Kalish ships breaking formation mid-strike. Soldiers who had spent their whole service believing they served a righteous cause suddenly confronted with proof they'd been lied to. Weapons turning uncertainly toward their own command vessel, instead of toward the mountain below. By the time rescue teams cut through the collapsed upper levels hours later, the sky above Alaska had gone quiet, not with the aftermath of a human victory, but with the strange, unprecedented sight of an alien fleet in open retreat, harried by its own internal rebellion, leaving Earth's orbit far faster than it had entered it. Elena walked out of that mountain into daylight for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Corvin leaning on her shoulder, Danny limping on her other side, all three of them blinking against a sun none of them had expected to see again. Reyes Mbeki was alive. Barely, pulled from an escape pod adrift in the wreckage of the Meridian, burned and broken but breathing. And when Elena found her weeks later in a military hospital and told her what her sacrifice had bought, the captain just closed her eyes and said quietly, "Good. Then it was worth it." The Dominion didn't return. Not with warships, not with silence, but with something humanity had never been offered by any spacefaring power before. A request for dialogue, hesitant and wary, sent through channels that hadn't existed a month earlier. For the first time in recorded history, an empire that had always taken what it wanted was asking a species it had once hunted for permission to talk. Corvin never fully explained what he'd become. Even he didn't have all the words for it. Human and something older sharing one mind, one voice, one set of eyes that occasionally caught the light strangely when he was tired. He didn't try to hide it, and nobody who mattered asked him to. Elena stayed beside him through every debrief, every negotiation, every long night when the weight of carrying two histories at once threatened to pull him under, the same way she'd stayed beside him in a collapsing sublevel, 11 years too late, and exactly on time. On the morning the first Kalish diplomatic envoy was due to arrive, unarmed, alone, asking to be received rather than feared, Elena and Corvin stood together at the ruined mouth of the mountain that had held them both for so long, watching dawn spread gold and quiet across a sky that, for once, held nothing to be afraid of. Corvin exhaled slowly, some old tension finally easing out of his shoulders as he looked up at that empty, waiting sky. "We're not late anymore," he said. Elena took his hand and didn't correct him, because for the first time in 11 years, neither of them had anything left to be sorry for.